From up here, Florida, or even complain for how many
There it goes.
So it won't be that hard to go
Donna, what time is that? In the afternoon. We're going sometime on Saturday, but I have no idea what time it is. Yeah.
Always something going on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, running through that.
Son and his roommate went out together for dinner party. All of her
Okay, right. Doug's,
Yes.
Joseph, this is
Yeah.
So didn't come through the. Okay, so it's 6:00. I'm going to call this meeting of the Board of Selectmen of the town of Chivay to order. And we welcome everybody who's here, and we welcome everyone who's trying to listen to us on the owl. And we'll all try to speak loud as we can, so you'll hear us, but we can't guarantee anything. So the first thing on the agenda is public comment for items not on the agenda for discussion, not action. Anyone have anything? Michael?
Yeah. I don't think what I'm going to say is going to surprise anybody because stories go big and faster than the speed of light. Fiber optic has nothing on Chavez. But today, this morning, awarded $800,000 by Connect Me.
Wow.
The paperwork involved with it, of course, but $800,000. Next step, we're at the top of their list. Next step is you guys have to accept it, of course. And then the town meeting has to approve the contract. Then we can actually think about actually having reasonable internet, really good internet by the fall of next year, which I think is something nice to look forward to after what we did.
So that'll be the fall of 2023?
Yeah.
So what is the process? Do we accept the grant before we accept the contracts, or do we accept the contracts before we accept the grant?
So last year at the annual town meeting, there was an article that was voted in to allow you to accept grants. You can accept the grant, but nothing could be done with that grant until the people of the town approve a contract, and then you go into.
Right. So we could put on next week's agenda accepting the grant. Is that right?
I think you need to wait from Connect Maine for any follow-up So you don't do anything unless there's communication from them, kind of,
Right.
because they'll know what to do and how to proceed with it.
Yeah, I think
So as soon
we
as
have
we
to have,
find
we'll
out-
have to have a contract with the state. Because they're not just giving us the money, it has to be used for specific purpose and all that.
Well, so does that contract have to go to town meeting too?
I don't think so, but
Well,
that's
I
a question.
mean,
No,
that's a
for
good
somebody.
question, if you should talk to Natalie.
The
because-
warrant article that you guys, that was approved last year authorized Board of Selectmen to accept grant money.
Yeah.
Right, but I'm talking about the.
If there's a contract, then that's gonna be further, but I think at this point, you just wait until whatever the paperwork from Connect Maine comes. I'm assuming it'll probably come through the town office, and then I'll pass that information, and then any directions going forward then.
So as soon as that comes, then it should get onto an agenda. And hopefully we'll know that question before
Yep.
we do the town meeting warrant, because if we have to, I mean, I think Natalie's rationale on, the fact that the Board of Selectmen could not approve the contract for, the broadband contract with Axiom is because it was more than a one-year contract. And so the same thing would be true with Connect Maine. So my guess would be you would have two warrant articles that would cover that.
That is correct.
Does everybody think that, does that sound reasonable? Does that cover the process?
Can I,
Jay?
congratulations. That's terrific. Have we gotten the contract cleaned up?
The contract is-
I-
And is it available for anybody else to look at it?
No, wait a second, I can answer that question. While Vika was sick, I was in communication with Natalie. Michael had called me and, they had, the broadband committee had responses to questions that she had had. And so we sent those to Natalie and, she called me on YouTube, I can't remember what day it is. But anyway, she was at the point where she was going to write a clean contract, meaning to get rid of all the red and the blue and everybody's comments. And and I asked her if we could get that as soon as possible. And she's going on vacation, so she guaranteed we'd get it before Friday. So I would assume that will go to Vika, and as soon as it comes, I would assume she would circulate it to this board and also to the broadband committee. But her feeling was that, you know, we're at a point now where either the town meeting votes it up or they vote it down, the contract. Because it's been back and forth so many times. But that's up to this board. But that's where it is in the, so nobody sees, the answer to your question, Jay, is nobody's seen it yet because she hasn't got it to us. Unless it came today. No,
Somebody's got it somewhere, but anyway,
no, nobody's got it anywhere because she's doing it.
okay. Good. Well, I look forward to looking at it.
David?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, there was a show on, I think it was on Netflix called Virgin River, and they made the comment that our internet is slow, but our gossip is fast, and that's just backing up exactly what we're hearing. And I just wanted to say that this is a great accomplishment for our young town. I just wanted to give a little information to help put it into perspective. There are almost 500 cities, plantations, towns in the state of Maine, and 23 towns or groups of towns made application to the broadband authority, Connect Maine Authority for the broadband grants. And 23, and 8 were awarded, a total of 11 towns with 8 grants. So we did pretty well. And really, as was mentioned, we were ranked #1 out of those awards. That's pretty incredible when you come right down to it. And you ask, why did this happen? And it happened because 83% of our population voted to fund the project in advance. So the broadband authority knew going in that there was public support for this. We're doing it without raising taxes, which is another critical element of our proposal compared to what other towns are doing. And we did have a very collaborative and creative working relationship with Axiom to come up with the contracts that, as you'll see when they're cleaned up. And now I just want to say, now the real work begins. We've got this far, but there's still a long way to go. And I just wanted to thank everybody in the town, and the board of selectmen, and everyone else who helped to make this happen.
So David, I have a question. So how much money then would we have to borrow that, I know Axiom is gonna pay it back, but what would the bond amount be approximately?
The bond amount,
Approximately 800,000.
and a lot of that is dependent upon some of the costs that are involved in the project that are unknown yet. For example, the attachment fee. The state has said no attachment fees. That's certainly going to be challenged by Consolidated or Fairpoint, whoever's doing the polls. So the exact amount can't be determined until those issues are settled.
At what point do you have to actually get the bond?
I think we basically get it in terms of dispersal. We will get a bond authorization up to a certain amount and then draw it down as needed. We hopefully will not use the entire amount.
No, I just meant when do you have to actually have it in place?
That's a good question. I think Lisa can answer that better. As far as when the main bond bank accepts applications, I would think we would put our application in as soon as the main bond bank is ready to accept them.
From the conversations I've had with Marjorie about Maine Bond Bank, when talking about dredging and coming up with money, it's a process that needs to have a little bit more detailed information than just, we need $900,000 for broadband. You need to have, I think what you really need to have is you need to have the people's vote saying that we're gonna go into contract and kind of have a more whole picture together, versus just saying that people want to authorize to get $950,000. And it's a process that I think that would start simultaneously if the vote was to be approved at town meeting for to go into contract with Axiom.
There is a schedule, that could be more detailed as to when we need money for what.
And that you would need to provide more information about when the anticipated project would start, when the money would, all of those details. So there's more information that's needed before we can go, you know.
How often do they accept, I know they have a couple of times each year. That would be something we probably should find out so that we, you know, get as much on the fast track as we can. Okay, anyone else have a question to ask or a comment? All right, thank you guys. Bye, Jen.
Not for a problem, but just another comment. Are you ready for that?
Um,
We're done in broadband?
We're done. Is this item not on the agenda?
I just wanted to comment on the agenda, because it was my understanding that this meeting was for budget purposes. And I was a little surprised, to say the least, when there was so much on this agenda for tonight, when we have a lot to do, I feel like, with the budget. And I didn't feel it was particularly fair to Vika, who's trying to catch up from being out, to have so much on here. And I believe we have another meeting next week. So I just wanted to comment that it's just a full budget, a full agenda that
And
I wasn't expecting.
I can appreciate that, and the reason that I did this is because there's so many things that are going to be on next week's agenda. And I just was trying to spread it out. And most of these shouldn't take very much time, actually. But that was the reason, because there's a bunch of things that are going to be on the agenda, for example, the broadband contract and some other things getting ready for town meeting. Okay, the town administrators report.
I did not have time to get a town administrator's report together. The only thing that, did come in today that, I need your authorization on is, we received the Cumberland County Sheriff's contract that we get every year, that, I just need your authorization to sign to send to them, so then, that way, they can, have law enforcement services for us, which we already paid for the summer.
Were the numbers the same?
This is for this year, yes. So
That's what I
we
mean.
already covered the cost of it. This is just the legal paper saying, that yes, we're signing it, so then you're gonna provide us the services. So, but they've already received their payment for it.
Mike?
Make a motion to authorize the town administrator to sign the law enforcement services contract with the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office.
Second.
Okay, any questions? All right, any questions from the public? All in favor? Motion is carried. Okay, so the next item is, to consider and take action on a request from SICA to include a warrant article related to sustainable housing on the town meeting warrant. And it's in your packet. I think Ben's here, Bob's here, Eliza Jane's here from SICA. If anyone has any questions? Jay?
I was a little confused. The pieces of property that you talked about in this, one of IO 3, 135, 133, we did a property exchange in which we own 134, or we're supposed to own 134. I couldn't find in my notes the actual final documents, but we apparently already own, we should already own that. And then it went on to talk about, you're talking to somebody in the Grinnell family about that piece. So I was a little confused.
So I guess the question is, did the deed actually reflect the property across the road, or did it just reflect?
It did.
It did reflect.
Originally, in all of our negotiations, it
But
certainly.
is it on the final deed? So that's a good question. So, that's easy enough to look out. To find that out.
And if it's not, we should go back to the Grinnells and say, oops, this got dropped off, please sign the paperwork.
I think that Ben's already been in communication with them, but, so Vika, can you check that out, that deed out, just to see if that is the case, if the town already has it? And then I would assume that, if the town does already have a title to that, it's up to, Vika, but they might want to add that to it, but it's their choice.
The second part of my observation.
Because we have to see what they think for.
So, Jay, thank you for that. That was not information that I had previously. We were operating under the assumption that IO 334 was still privately owned by the Grinnell family, and I have had conversations with them. As we all know, in these sorts of family organizations, it sometimes takes time to make official decisions, but they sound very receptive to the idea of donating the property if they in fact are the owners of the property, but that does sound like something we'll want to sort out. And if it is owned by the town, we certainly would want to add that parcel onto our motion.
Okay. The second part that I guess my thought was this, is I don't have any problem with having Seekit get the property. I think that's fine. But I think Seekit should get the property after the plan in place. In other words, I think that the town should say to Seekit and whoever else cares, we will provide this piece of property specifically for an affordable housing project once all of the things that you talked about here have been accomplished. But just deeding it over without that doesn't make sense to me.
Jay, I think that that's really what the intent of this motion is. I think the intent is that all it's doing is having the town designate it for a future affordable housing project, not deeding it to anybody at this time. It's just earmarking it so they can go forward.
That's fine, but that's not exactly what this says.
Well, what it says is to see if the town will designate it. two town-owned parcels of land located at the intersection of Ware Hill Road and North Road. And it gives a description for a future affordable housing project. So it's just saying designate as opposed to transfer. At the top where it says warrant article.
Yeah, I saw that.
Maybe there's better wording, but I think that's their intent, is a two-step process.
So, Jay, I would love it if you would point out where that was unclear, it would certainly be helpful, feedback. It is our intention that, that this be structured in the way that you suggested, meaning that this warrant article would just have those parcels designated for affordable housing use. And then what would happen after is Sika in collaboration with ECHO would go, we would develop a proposal that would answer these questions. And then the question of deeding that over would be held at a separate town meeting where the proposal would be presented.
Yes.
Hey Jay, in the explanation, it says detailed funding, construction overall. Project proposal presented to a subsequent town meeting for final approval. After the plan is created and approved by town meeting, the parcel would be deeded to Sika or another housing group.
Okay, I extended some of the things that that's fine, as long as there's a plan in place and a way to use it and deal with it that is appropriate, you know, by the town, you know, from the town perspective.
So I think that the way this works is the town will still own the property after this, but at that point, the town will have, just like we might put something in open space, or we might put it in something else, that we're just saying this land is available for affordable housing, and it's up to somebody to come forward with a plan to make it happen, you know, right?
Ben, if you don't mind this question, I don't think it's premature. If the land was deeded over by the voters of Shebig to Sika for a housing project, Sika is a nonprofit, and they currently are the owners of the property up on Schoolhouse Road.
Yep.
And so they don't pay property taxes to the town of Shebig, correct?
So for that rental property, that is correct. If we were to build a rental on that piece of land, then there would not be property taxes paid on it, although of course it would fulfill an important function. Right now, our plan is that that property would be used for an affordable home ownership project. And then with some mechanisms in place to ensure that it be continue to be used for affordable year-round housing in perpetuity. In that case, my understanding is, and Bob, feel free to contradict me. My understanding is if it was property taxes to the town, so this is in fact a way that those parcels the town books could be actually used to benefit.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question? So, want to, town meeting, or do we want to, a contingent upon finding out about the property?
I just looked in our Trio system and I-334 is a 9.3 acre lot. that's owned-
134,
Huh?
134.
Yeah, well, this in here says I-334, so
I-3-134 is the piece that the Grinnells own.
134, in this
134.
explanation that was provided, it said it's 34, not
Well,
134.
darn, just.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
Donna, could I ask a quick question, Jay? Jay, is that right in the middle
There was this little triangular piece. The town owned the two side pieces.
Yeah.
Which were tiny. Actually, owned the biggest piece, which was 0.44. The Grinnells, which owned the piece, the long strip, that was on tiny windswept, but they owned that, which split the two little pieces that we own. So part of the concept was that when we started going through all of this, was that we would end up with basically 6/10 of an acre plus or minus a little bit, which could be used for either low income, affordable housing or something else, because it would be a buildable lot that was, wasn't gonna cost us anything, and it would be a good use of the land.
Yep.
So that was the concept that underlied that part of the rest of the swap. But the rest of the swap was to make it work for everybody, and it did, and it has.
Properties ended up because when the North Road was built,
In our system, it still says that it's 0.14 of an acre owned by the Grinnell.
Is that as of after the tax law went through, or the property swap went through?
Well, it's, like I said, this is only updated once a year, so if it happened within this last year, then this information is going to be updated until we get it from Cumberland County.
anybody
Okay,
needs to
please.
do is just look at the deed that we have and see if that's included. That'd be easy. Okay, so what's the pleasure of the board?
I'll make a motion to send this request by seeker for transfer of the property in a warrant article pending the outcome of the research of ownership.
Okay,
Well, it's also pending, if I may, pending the the plan to use it. In other words, we're not just handing the property over, it's subject to their coming back with the plan. We're gonna set the property aside for them to use. Once they have a plan.
so maybe
I may consider an amendment, but I think Bob.
what I was thinking is you could just say, as presented in their memo, the warrant article, or read it, that was Bob.
We went through this several years ago, and the way we did it the first time around relative to the Schoolhouse Road project was a two-step process that was very clearly, what was voted on in the first town meeting was a tentative granting or setting aside of the land for the use of affordable housing, subject to a plan that could then be developed. So you can't develop these plans with main housing or with habitat unless you have a commitment of resources. In this case, we're talking about land. So it's definitely a two-step process. I think if Mark added the words as per their proposal, the proposal is clearly worded that way to be a two-step process, 2 town meetings, final approval would only happen, and final transfer of deed would only happen after the plan was reviewed and then approved by the town meeting in the second town meeting, whatever that might be.
Or you could just say to move forward the warrant article for a future affordable housing project or something, whatever you want to say.
Okay, I'll rescind the first motion, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay.
Let me make a suggestion.
Go ahead.
For the warrant item, maybe what we want to say is that we would like to set aside this piece of property for affordable housing to be, title to be conveyed upon an appropriate project and funding and so forth.
Well, what they're saying is they really want a two-step process. So this is giving you just the first step. That's what making this more complicated.
I think what Jay said is close, but it really needs to have the word SECA in there
Okay.
for main housing to take it seriously.
Well, that was not the, that was
That's
not
not
the
the warrant,
language that
that's
was
not the
given.
warrant article that's being presented. And
Right.
it's 2 properties that you're talking about. So you need to specify that if you make any motion.
Right, because that's different from what's written here.
I'm saying if we go with what Jay said,
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
if we go with what's written there is correct.
So why don't we just go with what's written here? I mean, I don't know. It's up to the board. What do you, Mark, what kind of motion do you want to make?
Sure now.
Yes,
I'd like to move forward with the warrant article presented by Sika as written. And contingent on the approval of IO 3134 to possibly be added at a later date.
the second to that?
Second.
Okay, so moving second, now, discussion. Jay, Jen? Anybody in the audience while they're thinking? Are you ready for a vote, or Jay, you still thinking?
I'm still thinking, that's all right.
No, I
And
know.
it still has to go to the lawyer anyway for
Right,
it's even.
Whatever.
okay, so we'll call for a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay. 41. All right, let's move on. The next item, I think at one of our previous meetings, I said I would reach out to to Mark Cable at the Army Corps of Engineers to get an update on his, where we were with the dredging, because we didn't know how much money we owed. So my question to him was, basically that. We have an upcoming town meeting in June, and we need a number or a close estimate before May 10th. Is that possible if we, at one time, we talked about the government's offer to finance the second half of the dredging project. When we spoke, I think you remember saying it wasn't a great option, but I can't remember why. Can you remind me? And then, so this is a response I got from him. Okay, been stuck at home with a case of COVID all week. Hope I test negative by Monday. They finished, and this is the dredging. They finished, but they did not achieve the design grade, especially in the upper end of the 10-foot channel. And the 8-foot turning basin did not get more than a bit of work done. They also left 20 high spots in the channel, mostly in the vicinity of the ferry dock, which they claim were ledge. So we'll need to get probes done on those points to confirm. So we may have to bring them back next fall to complete the work. Of course, they are likely going to want second mobilization, demobilization paid to do that, but we also cannot leave the project uncompleted. If we're going to maintain it, meaning if they, the Army Corps of Engineers, in perpetuity, we need to finish it in the first place. We'll get you copies of the survey soundings and pay volume computations once we've been reviewed. But I should come out to the island sometime in May, explain it all to the board, and get your views on how best to proceed. So that's another thing that's coming out in the next couple of meetings. We also have the eelgrass mitigation program to finalize with the state. That mitigation and 10 years of monitoring whatever mitigation we decide to use. The state significantly raised its per acre rates for participation in their in lieu of fee program. So I don't think either of us is going to want to pay for that option. That leaves planting the wheelgrass area somewhere else. Once I get you the plots and volumes, we should have a conference call. I'd also be interested to hear what the ferry company has to say. And I reached out to them, I haven't heard from them. So that's the update. Anybody have any thoughts, questions? Mark?
So obviously, we're not gonna have a number,
Right.
and it sounds like Army Corps may require them to come back next year.
In the fall.
So, but at some point, we'll have to try to get some sort of answer out of Mark Cable of whether we have to budget anything for this upcoming
Right.
operations year.
And so he is, because, you know, he said he should come out here sometime in May and talk to the board. If we're paying for them to come all the way back up here and all the way to go back again for something that they didn't finish. And it doesn't sound like he's too happy about it. So I don't know where this, you know, I think all we can do is think about it and wait till he comes and talks to us about it. I mean,
I looked at the original agreement today, and it has it very specifically written out that you were responsible for 204.10 was the first payment that was done, and it was expected that the second payment was gonna be that much. Now, I think whatever this project finalization could have an adjustment to those numbers, but you should be expected to pay about $204,000 for the remainder of it. I've spoken to Marjorie at length about it today. At this point, the two options that you really have to look into is one, go out to Machias Savings Bank or a bank and get a loan. Or you set money aside in capital reserve. With the bond bank, I think the timing and how quickly we need the money, we don't have the capacity to be able to bond that money right now. It is still something that would have to be approval upon town meeting. So one way or another, this payment is gonna have to be due probably before September, would be my guess, based on the information that I read today. And those two options are gonna be how you're gonna have to figure out how to come up with that money.
And so we put 50,000, I think, into the capital reserve for this year, and we had 18 there, is that right?
So we put 30 or
Two.
2,
Oh, 32 in
18,
there.
bring it up.
Okay, we brought it up to 50, so that means we have to come up with another 150 plus or minus J.
Since they have not satisfactorily completed the contract, why are we talking about paying?
Because you signed the contract.
Yeah, but we also signed, and they signed that they would complete the job.
So I think this
It's
is,
like if you sign a contract with somebody to build a house and they leave you with half a roof. You know, I mean, you just keep writing checks.
well, this is why we need to, that's why he's saying to us that he needs to come here and talk to us. And they need to do some borings first to find out what exactly the story is of why they didn't get done. I mean, I can email him tomorrow and say, where are we in the process? We really need to go further with this. But it sounds to me like they don't even know the cost of the ILPR. Yes.
So, do we need a town meeting to get a loan from the bank?
Yeah.
You're gonna need town meeting to get this money, whether you set it aside in capital reserve or whether you decide to go to the bank to get the money. So it has to be something that has to be decided to be presented in a warrant for town meeting. It's not gonna be something that they're gonna let you wait until next year's budget season to figure out and get the money then. It has to be, the money is gonna need to be there.
There's something in the next fiscal year, what she's saying is,
Yes.
well, it might be January when they tell us, but before next June, we're probably going to have to come up with that money.
So at this point, we need, the only thing I see is we need to make a decision, whether we go with the bank or we budget for the capital.
Yes, you're
I
gonna
think
have to
that's
come
the
up with the
decision,
money.
because-
It might be a little less, you might fight with the president to get them to come back, to get them to do it, but in this upcoming budget,
Yeah.
the money is gonna have to be come up with. So, and it's gonna have to be either capital reserve or it's gonna have to be through a bank.
Because our warrants are gonna have to be done here fairly soon, so we don't have a number. We need to have some kind of warrant that will be either clear or it'll be in the capital.
So what we should probably say is that, for a warrant article, is that to authorize us to borrow up to, say,
204.10, because the agreement, the original agreement you guys signed was for two payments. It
right,
was
well, we have
204.10.
some money already put in, one is in the capital budget, and one is, and we've got 18,000 left over in the regular, in that line item.
My thoughts are, the question, Eelgrass also, leave the 32 in capital and do some kind of wording to borrow up to 200 from the
Okay,
bank.
yeah.
That way we have 50 kind of wishy-washy to play with.
Right.
I have a different take on it. Is anyone interested in hearing it?
Sure.
I would take the 100,000 back out of the stormwater reserve account, take the 50,000 back out of the public works equipment account, and there's your $150,000 balance sitting right where you need it. And then get authorization from the town meeting if we need to borrow up to more than another $50,000. That's what I would do. Keep taxes where they are.
Well, what are you gonna do if you need money to pay an engineer to design the stone wall? How are you gonna do that?
That's something.
Yeah, I know, we do, we've got to,
Have we
we
have,
probably have about,
Do
by
we
the
have an
time we're
estimate?
finished, we'll probably have 150, 175. I have no idea how much, no, I asked him about a month ago, and I haven't got anything back about how much, an estimate for what a design costs.
I don't know what their design would be.
Well, let's talk about it during budget.
Right, so people can kind of, we'll come back to this issue? Okay. Anybody else have any questions about or comments about the dredging project?
Will you give me a copy of that email, please?
Sure, I can give you this right now, and I'll give you one I wrote to him. Okay, so the next is to talk about the budget. Can I get a much time to think?
So, Speaker, would you like to tell us how you developed this final draft?
Well, I took all the information that you guys asked me. So after the last meeting for the school board, I corrected and plugged information in here. The one thing that if you know on page 15, Trio has been having some challenges, and the line item 5112, capital purchases, I could not get that out of there and move it into capital reserve, and so Marjorie had to play around with it. I think by the end of this afternoon, it got moved properly, but that mistake is still there. So that has the ultimate, expense line item for 3,100, Ron, but I added everything since the last meeting. And then what I did is I went through and really focused on the revenue to try to give an estimate on what we're going to receive for revenue. And I used a lot of the same graphs and calculations that Marjorie had in place. And she helped me with that quite a bit. Actually, she did a lot of it to try to speed me up and bring me. And we just looked at the last 5 years and saw where the revenue was and kind of predicted where we would be. And put those 2023 numbers in under revenue. And there's a few items that were gonna go up and a few items that went down. One of the things to keep in mind, I know on today's discussion, there is the approval of the revised building fees. If you approve those go into effect immediately. That's potentially doubling the revenue that you're gonna receive for that item. We have another one coming up that we're gonna present for solid waste fees. That's another way where you can, so anywhere that you're able to add extra revenue by increasing the fees, that's ultimately gonna make, expenditures less in other places. The one thing that has not been added under the revenue side is if you look under the tax commitment, we don't have that number. And picking Marjorie's brain, that number, when it comes to budget season, is just a guess. And what you do is you go through and you figure out and you estimate your revenue everywhere else. And then you go to the bottom line and see what your total budget's gonna be. You subtract that revenue and that's what you're gonna put in for the tax commitment. And so this number is as it was last year. Same thing with the assessed value.
Yeah.
That hasn't been done, that hasn't been figured out yet. Hopefully the value will go up of the properties. That ultimately is gonna collect us more taxes, more revenue coming in, ultimately makes, the tax rate lower, so.
When do you get that number?
that's gonna be something that the next time Jackie is in, we're gonna try to work on that a little bit. And what I did is, Marjorie had a pre-commitment estimate for, a calculation form that she used. She was big into Excel documents. And so, with her help, went in and put in last year's tax commitment to try to kind of predict where we would be with the tax rate. And so she did with last year's tax commitment, looking at the current debts and all of the expenditures that you've looked into. She was looking, that the mill rate could potentially go up a little bit, to accommodate everything. She also spent a lot of time, finalizing last year's budget. And so she had a recommendation on how much she thought that the town could comfortably use from her designated fund for the town and for the school. And so the town, I think she was recommending, let me pull it up, using, 175,000 for town, and then, suggesting that the school use 150. So that would be, also help in the taxes. So that was kind of, but the focus has been yesterday and today.
Nice job.
Thank you, Rika, that's very helpful. What I thought I would offer each select board member an opportunity, maybe starting with you, Jen, to see if you have specifics that you'd like to go through department by department for any recommendations.
You
Or
always have me first, because I'm
I'm good at it.
yeah, I went through and sharpened my pencil yet again.
Okay,
And when I went through, I know that, I mean, we're looking for big numbers. And I didn't find like huge numbers that I wanted to change, but I squeaked by and nipped and saved and shaved and came up with about 54,000 to save. And that is significant in my book. So when I say, you know, I suggest $500 less, I mean, just kind of roll with me.
just go ahead, tell us what page and
So
number you're on.
page 1, postage, because we have no annual report that we're sending out, is that correct?
So this is the tricky part, is the annual report, budget is for, in this year for next year. So the money that we budgeted last year for this year, we would have been spending on the annual report. The money that you're budgeting for the next year would be for the following, so it's kind of a stagger back a little bit, so.
We don't need an annual report for next year either.
Well, if that's the decision you want to make, then you can pull that.
What number was that?
3210, I was proposing 1,500.
Can I ask a clarification? On postage, we never mailed those out, did we? We didn't mail out the town report.
So for the postage, this is postage. Printing 3220 is where the annual report would be.
Right.
So that's where you would have wanted to cut the line. Postage, this is how much money we spend, which you can see year to date, we're already at $1,700
Got it.
for postage.
Okay, I'll resend that one then. Printing, is that all printing, not the annual report?
That's checks and annual reports.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Page 2,
Page 2, 3335 for travel. We just hired a bookkeeper who's on island. I believe that was increased because of a potential bookkeeper commuter, so I was suggesting that we drop that to 4,000 from 7,000. Can we just keep going?
no, you want to get consensus as we go?
It would make it easier for me to keep track. If you could do that, that'd be great.
I'm sorry, what?
If you guys can decide what you want to do with those items as you go along, so then I know what to change.
Yeah, that's kind of what I just asked, not in a as clear a way to do. So she's recommending dropping from 7,000 to 4,000 on 335 travel. As you can see, 2021 actual was 4,000, 2020 actual was 2,800. Last year's budget was actually 8,500. Year to date is $3,436. What do you guys think?
Well, my only question about this would be, we don't have the year 2019 before the pandemic, when people weren't traveling. So it's hard to know. I do think we could drop it, there's no question.
I'm okay with the recommendation of 4,000 myself.
Me too.
No,
Get that, Vika?
Got it, thank
Thank
you.
So
you.
who's the new bookkeeper?
oh, you weren't
I
there.
probably missed
I
that.
hired somebody last week.
It's gonna be you when you're not raking dirt.
You're out partying on this.
So you really want this all messed up?
You can tell you.
Go ahead, Jim.
Handle bonus.
That's okay.
Handle bonus.
So skipping ahead to page 7.
Okay.
Oh, yes, I know.
So wages, part-time law enforcement services, am I to assume this is for
Parking enforcement.
parking enforcement, which we're paying, or we're suggesting $8,528 for the year, yet we're only bringing in about $700 in tickets so far, is I think what we talked about. I think this is ridiculous to pay somebody that much for parking enforcement down here. I don't think that it's necessary. I think that we should back off. And I think that it should be down to $4,000 for the year.
How much do you pay now?
20.
We're paying $20 an hour.
So is it 1 hour a day?
Yes.
I think there should be a stipend position.
I could go along with stipend position, but I think we need to do it every day, because if we don't do it, we're going to be right back where we used to be. We're gonna have no spaces down there because people are just gonna leave their cars because they wanna go away for the weekend, or they're gonna wanna do whatever. But I think that we should.
How come we can't just, people have been trained not to leave their cars down there?
I don't think they've been trained because they don't wanna pay a ticket. That's how they've been trained. I mean, I lived it before we did this. And that's my concern, is that, if we do away with, any kind of enforcement, and, people know that they can just stay there as long as they will,
Well, it's not home.
well, I think they're gonna figure it out pretty fast. As, what were they saying about the gossip mill? And we're right on right now. I mean, so maybe,
Because it is existing, and there is a job description in it. Can I look into see whether you can cut that position out like that, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a minute.
Go ahead.
Just, we've looked at, I think, the number was $760 so far this year in parking fees.
Yeah.
How many uncollected? I'm just thinking we have one particular miscreant who runs up with a bill that's at least that, if not more, every year.
But we, for the most part, and Chris can speak to this because she puts in the parking, people pay their parking. We have one or two,
Yeah.
one in particular, but we haven't seen a significant number of those parking tickets coming in recently. But for the most part, the tickets that we receive in the office do get paid.
I drove past a truck that had four ticks on the tire. That's just the other morning, and that's why I was curious.
Yeah, I agree, this is not one of our best managed areas in the town.
Well,
In a couple of different ways, maybe the position and definitely lack of consequence for being a bad
what do
actor.
you, the other part of the problem?
Where do we leave off on that, leave it until people listen for something that we left out there?
Yep.
Go ahead.
This is a tricky one. So I'm on page 12. 10:10. I brought this up previously. And I have looked into several towns. I want to be clear that this discussion is not about the history of the harbor master position. It's the community, what the current harbor master with the town of Shebig is or is not doing. I made calls and obtained the information in order to find out what similar towns are paying for a harbor master position. It turns out that we are paying almost 6 times the average rate for the position. This is significant, especially in a budget cycle with proposed increases in several other departments. By comparison, at 6 times the average rate for the position, that would be the equivalent of paying over $400,000 per year for a town administrator, or well over $200,000 per year to staff the transfer station.
You're all standing up to check.
Yeah. We have an obligation to taxpayers for proper compensation levels for all employees. I would suggest that we shift the town of Shebig Harbor Master position from an hourly pay rate to a fixed annual stipend. I would suggest that we budget that amount for $5,000. Out of the towns I surveyed, the average rate of compensation, they were all stipend positions, was $4,500. Do you guys have any questions?
I'd just like to make one comment, and that is that only half of this is for the harbor master, the other half is shellfish. This is a shared position, so we're talking about 13,300 and something.
Well, the shellfish,
I mean, I'm just making it, you know, that it's a combined position. It was set up that way in the
Yep.
beginning.
and I don't think we need a shellfish person, because there's no shellfish. And I asked about other towns, and they don't have shellfish people.
I agree that, if I may.
Yep.
I agree that the shellfish side of this is pretty sketchy nowadays. I really don't know what's going on, with that part of the position. When we started the town in 2007, that's the recommendation we got from the transition committee group that William Hamilton headed up, was 12,000 for shellfish and 12,000 for harbor master. And back then, at least there was plans and stuff to check on. So I agree with that. I don't know about the $5,000 for the whole thing. Sounds a little low to me, but,
It's actually higher than what the average is.
Which towns, do you have a list of the towns?
Islesboro, North Haven, Long Island, Vinyl Haven, and the town of Friendship.
I hesitate changing this right now without some kind of concrete plan. Either we're changing this, it's gonna change drastically. So to do that just before budget season and try to button everything up before June, before this takes effect, that's a lot. I think we need a plan.
And I thought we talked about that when this came up before, that we were going to put this off so that in the next year, that there would be a real study done and it would be analyzed and a plan going forward.
No, all I was told was that we didn't have time to deal with it. And I'm just telling you the details that I've gone into and what I've researched and what I've suggested. And you can do with it what you
Yeah.
see is fit for this town.
I would be interested in having a more concrete discussion on this position as it relates to the operation of the town. I would want to have it on an agenda so that people could come that were either involved in boating or shellfish or stone wharf and stuff, whatever. Take the stone wharf alone. I would hate to have nobody up there ever checking on the situation at the stone wharf. And I'm not saying we're terrific at policing our own marine facilities, but there is some value with that certainly.
That's why I'm suggesting a stipend position.
Yeah. So I would, I'm kind of with Bo, I don't want to cut it tonight, but I would definitely participate or welcome a discussion that was rational, had basis that you've got, and had factuals and actuals. And I'd like to hear from the two committees, coastal waters and the shellfish committee.
Another thing I think would be really good is if we could talk about, if there was a workshop, we could talk about what is it we want to have done. When we've been in these stone wharf meetings, everybody's got all these ideas about how we're gonna do this and how we're gonna do that. And actually maybe come up with a job description that either fits into a stipend position or fits into, what is it we really need as opposed to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't want to get too carried away, but if we decide to put money into the stone wharf, it sounds like we're gonna need a traffic cop for boats and cars up there. Basically, try to keep things.
But maybe if we're
manageable.
doing the job description, trying to see,
Right, might not even be a marine base, or
Right.
as much of a marine base position. You have more, Jen?
So page 15. 410 rental equipment.
Mhm.
I was questioning that because if we go ahead and buy the tractor that has the things attached, there's no need to rent the equipment. Is it necessary to keep that amount in there for this year, or can we take it out if we do a purchase of that kind of thing
You would still need to budget that amount,
for this year?
because my understanding with with that tractor, that I contacted the company and they were, which they never did, gave me a current quote for the year is, the way that Justin had explained it was that if we purchased that tractor, then it would cover the cost of what we spend on the rental equipment. When I spoke to the place for that particular tractor and spoke to Chuck and asked them about the payment, it was gonna cover the cost of this, but then it was gonna be an additional cost. So I'm not sure how the explanation came about in the fact that it would cost us to have a brand new tractor and the payments on an annual basis would be the cost of what we spend on rental equipment. It was gonna be twice as much.
I don't get it. That's
So,
what- Yeah.
I don't, you would have to make the investment to buy it and have this cost not be there, but be paying, for a tractor.
right,
In addition, to, it would have been, because the payments were gonna be like $1,200 a month. And this was, the numbers didn't add up to me after I talked to him, so I'm not sure where that justification came from, that Justin had brought up the first time around. It didn't make sense to me, which is why I kind of left this be for now, because I'm assuming you don't want to talk about purchasing a tractor right now and adding more money into the budget.
So was that, the budget, was the tractor in the capital budget?
Could I just point out something real
Cat
quick?
40.
The 9055 on capital improvements, public works equipment, we proposed $40,000. I'm sorry, we proposed $50,000. And we will, if that passes at town meeting, if they didn't here, we'll have $70,000. But still not going to quite accomplish what you want.
But it's pretty close though, isn't
Short
it?
answer,
What's the total for buying the tractor?
I don't know,
It was,
85.
it was more than 85. It was like creeping up to almost $100,000.
Right, so I guess the thing is, so say it was 100,000, I don't think it's that much, but say it was 100,000 and we already have 70, we're only borrowing 30, and say we borrowed it for 5 years, that's $6,000 a year for a payment. Right?
But the way that the payment plan had to go through that particular company, it wasn't $6,000 a year for 6 years. You have to make monthly payments. That was
Well,
the
no,
catch.
I understand that, but they should
So
add up
it's
to
more,
6,000.
than $6,000 a year, so it ends up being more than.
Yeah.
On paper, it seems real, but then when you go to the agreement that the company present you and how you have to follow theirs, they work on, you pay it for so many years and it's like a lease thing and then you own it outright, you have to do $1,200 payments a month regardless. So you're having to budget $12,000 a year, not $6,000.
So then you pay it off in a couple of years.
Yes, but you would still have to budget more upfront than what you have in the budget right now.
So right now, we're bogged down.
Yeah.
So I think, did you get the answer to your question? You
Yep.
can't quite take it out yet.
Got it.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay,
Which one?
4605, I think we have I know you talked about culverts and drainage, but sorry, there's too much in there right now. I was proposing $2,250. I cut it in half,
So 4605, you're suggesting what?
$2,250.
What does the drainage go for? I mean, what is so culverts, I understand that.
I'm trying to see what you have in there.
So we buy culverts, but then what does the money go for the drainage? What does that mean?
Oh, it's just culverts. Oh, okay.
Is
Oh,
that,
right.
oh, is
It
that?
would be material.
Oh,
that's-
materials to go with it, okay. So the
So
culverts
anything
and
that you would
materials.
buy to replace a particular culvert would go under that line item.
Do we have a lot of culverts that need to be done before the next road thing?
No,
Anybody know a lot?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble figuring out how much we have for balance.
Well, it's not a balance,
It's
it's,
not.
it's on the operating one.
It's on the operating expense on 15.
Oh, that's different, I'm sorry, that's
Yeah.
different than easements
That's
and drainage.
different from
Sorry.
the,
Sorry, confused.
that's okay.
So I'm fine with it.
Sounds reasonable.
What's the number, Jen? Sorry.
$2,250.
I'm just thinking it needed 2,000.
That's fine.
What'd you say, 2,000?
2,000.
You
If
hear
you
that?
if you take a look at 21, we spent $513. 22, year to date is 21, so $1,200. So it's like $2,000.
Go right ahead, Jen.
Contributions,
What page you on?
I'm on page 18. And I think we should keep all of these the same as they were last year, so I would suggest taking the 3,000 away from the rec center and keeping it at 56.5.
Jay,
I vote for that.
what do you guys think?
Why, I'm trying to remember why we, what their request was to
asked for 59.5, up $3,000. And they, in the balance. So, you know, they're putting money into their savings account, so to speak. And they're not necessarily spending it all, and then they're asking us for an extra $3,000. It just makes no sense to me whatsoever. It's just, whatever.
Chris, it's nothing against your husband. Sorry. Even.
You guys have a opinion, or, you know,
I guess I would like to just remember, I think, be able to go back over, I don't have.
all that they said was they asked for $3,000 more for increased operational expenses.
Oh, is that what it
That's
was?
all I heard.
Well, I know next year they will not have an honorary fellow and they're gonna have to pay somebody to work here. That's- I don't know if that was part of the rationale.
We're saving money on kids' books right now.
They haven't hired anybody yet.
I would be the last one to hear it, but no.
That's right, it's your grandchild is over now.
Yes, he's graduated from kids' place.
I'm not.
I'm gonna leave it in for now. It's up to you, Donna.
I'd like to leave it in so if we have a specific, you know, I'd like to find out specifically what they're gonna do with that money. We can get, you know, then if we can just check in with them and get a rationale, because I just can't remember off the top of my head.
Sorry, we'll come. Next
Page
page.
29, I'm not going to suggest anything, but I am going to remind you again that I am going to pursue, when I have more time, the Dark Skies Initiative and cutting street lamps. I'll tell you that. And then page 30. Why is it that the contingency is up so much?
It's not, it's the same thing we've had for years.
It's just a guessing game that we may need some of it.
But we never spend it.
It's all like.
We've had years where we got right to the very end.
So this is.
So it's like an
16
emergency.
every year.
Yeah.
I think the most we've spent is probably 8,000 or 10,000.
Oh, I think we went to 14 or 15.
Yeah, 1 year.
Yeah.
Anyway, back.
And maybe, well, I wasn't on here when Bo was here, so we've had at least several times that we've gotten close.
Did you have just the number?
10,000.
I can't go to 10. I could probably go to 12, maybe 14.
I'm with, leaving it the same, not knowing exactly.
You just never know what's gonna happen.
We're cutting our budget a little tight this year, more than usual. And I think cutting stuff that will give us flexibility.
I'm in the 10 to 12 range.
I could go down to 14. No? Try to tell you something.
I don't like it, but it's
Okay,
not up to me, it's up to the majority.
well, right now that you got for keeping it where it is,
You're
I
14,
can go to 14,000.
he's 12, and I'm 10.
I figure, why was it so big difference? And ended up at 12.
I'm just afraid we're gonna run into some things. that we may- Let's just keep it at 14 and see how we do and we'll revisit next budget. All right.
What do you want to do?
Are we changing it to 14?
Sounds good. Page 34. capital improvements. Harbor Massel investment in equipment. I don't know why we have $1,000 in there. I guess to put towards the new engine, put towards possible vote, but where that's all in limbo, I suggest zero. 19060.
Jay,
I mean, I spent a little time reading what the harbor master's duties are. And they don't really, they don't need it.
she's recommended cutting out $1,000 on 9060 on page 34.
I'm fine with it since we don't have a plan for motor, engine or anything.
Yeah, and what other equipment would it be?
I say take it out. We're
You
taking
have an
that,
outboard.
we're taking that out for now.
Okay.
9070, I know you guys have talked about coastal access fund. Currently, we have $10,000 in there. For almost $11,000. And you're proposing an ad hoc committee to look at this. I think $5,000 is way too much in this budget that we're trying to whittle down, in my opinion. So I would not go with 5,000. I would say 1,500. You're gonna have a committee that will hopefully look at it and make a plan.
Jay,
I would have been happy at zero, but 1,500 is okay.
okay, what do you guys think?
I think we should keep it at 5,000, especially if we're going to have a committee and we've got, we know already that there are at least 2 or 3 sets of steps. If we want to have access to the shore that we need to construct.
Well,
Yeah, I think, of our population right now needs for beach access.
So you're telling,
And I mean,
wouldn't that be something that your committee looks at and then plans for? And comes up with a proposal?
right, but if you have money here, we can actually move it forward. That's the idea, or if all of a sudden we have a storm and it washes something out and we have to replace it.
And what happened to the talk about using, like, did you check out the ramps
I
last?
did, I'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, that's a different, these are new sets that we don't have.
So I have another counter proposal for you. I'll knock it down to 2,000 and 2,500. How about 2,000?
How about 2,000?
I'm fine with 2,000.
Better than zero.
So yes, I went and measured one of the old ramps we have in our town garage yard because you know where they store the floats and you're heading into the wood dump. We have an old aluminum ramp that we used to use when we were part of the town of Cummins and sit in the bushes for probably since we've been in town. And it's about 36 feet long. And we talked about this at last week's meeting, and I thought it would, I went down and looked at Chandler's when you go down to the field and go down to the shore and all that. And I think if they went down there with Jim Butler's blessing and took out those wooden landscape steps that are really not being utilized, everybody's walking around them, and scope that down in there, that's gonna work quite nicely for an access for people to use without building anything. They could even anchor it and leave it probably year round right there. I don't think Mother Nature would even get a shot at it.
Shannon Beach,
So my only point is we could probably use something that's just sitting around that's, we're not going to use, because it's too short for our, length of our systems, probably at least 5 feet right now. problem without really much any expense at all. That's what I came up with. Go ahead.
So it did have to be DEP approval also, so.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned Jim Butler, and I have not brought this up to him because Vika would be the one talking with Jim Butler and her crew if she thought there was something worth pursuing. But we would probably direct her to do that, which we're not in that mode at the moment. At the moment, we're in the mode of, I'm proposing 2,000, are you guys going to go on with that? Okay. So changing $5,000 to 2,000. Did you have anything else?
No, that was it.
Oh, sorry.
Going back to the prior item, suggestion, you guys consider selling all the equipment related to the harbor. We were looking previously at buying a new motor. We've had a discussion about, we really don't need to have a harbor master on the water. There's gotta be a dinghy that could be sold, there's probably a motor for the dinghy, the boat. There's probably $2,000 to $5,000 worth of revenue by selling that stuff, as opposed to letting it sit in the yard, not being used.
Yeah, I don't know what thingy you're referring to. I don't know if the public works crew uses the small aluminum boat with the Yamaha motor to move floats around.
I think when you're setting those float
The
boats,
outboard does get used to move float around. That would be a recommendation of something that the town would sell.
Okay. Any other selectmen have anything else now that Jen's gone through the whole budget? That's a good thing. Anybody else would like to speak to anything? Go right ahead, Jerry, if you have any.
There was just getting Jen got most of it. All right, bear with me a second. I guess can't find the one that I'm looking for, but I know that this is gonna be a happy thought for some folks, but we might want to think of the town meeting to suggest moving the kingdom into areas where we can use it. Because what we saw from the recommendations were basically not, didn't make any sense.
Have we gotten a bill for Barney's work?
Did we pay Barney for his work?
We have not received the bill.
So we need to put, was it $10,000 or $15,000? That was our half of it.
My understanding it's gonna be around $10,000, yes.
So you're not really proposing anything, Mike, because there's nothing in there to propose, is that accurate?
$70,000.
No, but I'm saying you're not proposing anything budgetarily for this coming year.
We can move some of that into stone. Or into the red.
are you proposing anything? Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I propose that we move 50 grand from the Indian Point retaining wall into the dredging.
Jen?
Well, something's gonna happen there later. I don't know what, like, I don't know when, but
Yeah. I can't, Donnie, you all set? I can't go along with it until we see if any discussions happen between the town of Shabig and the Ballard family or whoever. the other
Indian Island.
family. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Jay. Did you have anything else, Jay?
I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. So, do you have anything specific?
didn't really have anything to consider since Vika and Marjorie came up with a roundabout number of 175 grand. Thinking of either earmarking it or putting into 90/10 dredging. Under the funds.
As opposed to
I don't know if we can earmark that or is it-
Could I ask you, in your opinion, was Marjorie and yourself going to recommend a number of roughly 150 to 175,000 to soften increase to the taxpayers?
There wasn't a recommendation as far as how you choose to use it. There was the recommendation of, she said that based on the numbers that she's plugged in and finalized in the previous year, not having it been audited, 175,000 is what she would be comfortable setting aside. Into, to use out of the undesignated funds, how you choose to. I did have the brief conversation of, because I had a similar thought that if there's 175 on undesignated, that could help out with the dredging costs. But her suggestion was, with the money that you're already looking to put into capital, if you add another 175, I think one way or another, based on the information as it sits right now, without the real estate valuation for the upcoming year, things are going to go up a little bit. So I think the undesignated would help burden the blow to the taxes. And her focus and my focus after that discussion was really, I think you're gonna have to look at taking out a loan for the dredging. But that's a decision for you guys to make, however you choose to make that.
So when does Jackie come again?
She comes on the second Tuesday of the month. She was just here last week.
Yeah, she was here last week, but because it seems like we're kind of in a, I don't know, in limbo, because we don't have any kind of an idea about what the value of the town was on April 1st, which is a huge number, that if we know that, and we know it's gone up, 20% or whatever it's gone up. It gives us some kind of an idea of where the tax rate's gonna be, but right now we have absolutely no idea.
Well, like I said earlier, the calculation form that Marjorie used to use, that we plugged in the information using last year's real estate valuations, the mill rate is right now looking to be about 15, which is a little bit higher.
What was it last year?
13.5, I believe it was. So this would increase things a little bit, but
But it doesn't include the increase.
that doesn't include exactly. So,
And it doesn't include when the solid waste committee comes back with all of their recommendations about how much money we're gonna make out of trash.
yeah, and that's the other thing. It does include if you choose to, take into the account the the code enforcement officer, fees, solid waste, those are additional revenues that could help.
That will help, so it may not be that dramatic.
So this is just my thinking slash position for tonight. I'm not comfortable saying that we're going to target earmarking the 175,000 for anything. I'm also not excited about having to borrow more money to pay off the dredging, especially where we have not been able to have a good conversation with Mark Cable of Army Corps to see where he thinks things are gonna stand now and going forward, but we'll see how that conversation works out. So I'm sorry, I can't go along with your proposal. That's really what I'm saying.
How about we sort of split the difference a little bit? If we assume that we've got 175 and undesignated that we can utilize without getting below the levels that we like in that account, if we put 75 into dredging and used 100 for reducing taxes, that would get the dredging program, that'd get us roughly, we'd have roughly half the money we need for dredging.
So in that case, what you would do is you would put $75,000 right now into capital reserve dredging.
Right.
And then at town warrant, you would use $175,000 of undesignated funds to offset the
Right.
tax rate.
Right. But just designating some of that for dredging, because it's a bill, whether we like it or not, we know we're gonna get, whether they did the work completely or not, we're still gonna get a bill, and I don't really see us going to court to resolve that.
I think you're gonna be paying the $204,000 regardless.
Right.
I mean, that's
No, I
basically, you
understand.
signed it, that's.
And we
what
may
you're-
be paying a lot more if we have to pay for mobilization.
But I was just confused because I thought you said take 100 to soften
Right.
the tax bit and use 75, and I thought you just said 175.
You
It's the
can't
same
take
thing.
undesignated fund balance and say, I'm gonna use it towards dredging. So what you're doing right now is you're gonna say, we're gonna take $75,000 and we're gonna put it to capital reserve.
Oh, you just stated the whole amount.
And then in the
Thank you.
end, in the town warrant, it's $175,000
It balances
to
out.
off, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
just
fine
a road
with,
plan underneath.
I'm fine with a scenario like that. I'm not sure how concrete to make that decision.
I guess my feeling is that, we don't have to have the warrant until 10 days before town meeting or something like that, right?
We'll change our minds.
So
Well-
the point is not how close can we cut.
You.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is we've got till the middle, so she comes back here another time, so that we would have more information.
Yes, but the whole thing needs to go in front of Natalie for approval,
Right.
and she would like a couple of weeks, at least a week, if not 2 weeks.
Right, so what I'm thinking is,
advance,
we have a meeting on next week, on the 4th, and then we have one on is it the 4th, next Wednesday?
Yeah.
Third or fourth, and then 2 weeks after that, we should try to finalize everything at that meeting 2 weeks after that.
4th and the 18th.
The 18th, we would finalize, and that's what I'm saying, is we could wait to finally, make the final cut on that 18th, that's the drop dead deadline. And we would have more information about the income.
You do have, right now, the way it stands, you're on the 4th, which is next week, is supposed to be your final budget review.
Oh, boy.
And when is Mark Cable supposed to be here?
We don't know, he said later in May.
That's helpful.
I
It's
think-
always helpful.
I think we just need to decide what we're gonna do about dredging tonight. Because what Mark's gonna say is not gonna change anything.
No,
It's only gonna change that dollar
No,
amount, that's all.
I understand. So right now, our scenario is an okay one. We would propose to the people of Quebec to use 175,000 out of undesignated fund balance. We would direct 75 to go towards specifically dredging, 100,000 to soften the increase.
No, right now, what you would do is you need to, if that's what you want to do, you need to, as a board, vote to put $75,000 in the capital reserve
to add it to
to
it.
add to it.
And so what she's saying is that there's 175,000, it's gonna come off the bottom.
Off the bottom anyways. Yes.
So,
And so we can either say,
But you still need authorization to do it.
Town warrant, there will be a warrant article
That's
saying
fine.
that
Oh,
using,
okay.
My point is, people still have to give you permission to do
it
it.
would be $175,000.
but if you.
But it won't specifically be, we won't be specifically earmarking 75.
Yeah, that's right.
But if we add 75 in
Right
there,
now,
it's really going to increase the budget by 75.
yes.
And even though psychologically we know it can be offset, I think we ought to find out what the rate would be to borrow some of the money, because we already have some of it, from the Shire Savings Bank, and see if we can get if we could get a loan that could be paid off early with no penalty. I mean, then it gives you an option.
So tonight you're proposing adding 75,000 to dredging, which has a balance of about 18,000 bucks.
right, but we had originally budgeted 32.
Yep,
So if we just made that number 100 instead of 32.
yep.
I think we need to think about this. We need more information to know what the bottom line is, because if we're thinking that, and we can always cut it out, I guess that's the whole thing. But if you're worried about the tax rate going up and we don't know what the revenue is, we're just really still shooting it.
Yeah, I know, that's why I'm a little,
That's why I think we need to have two options. We need to
But
know.
if the bottom end is you signed an agreement saying that you will be paying $204,000. So you owe that money. They can very easily come and say, you have all 5 of your signatures on it saying that you're gonna pay that $204,000.
Right, so what I'm saying is, let's find out how much it costs to borrow.
That's only 40 grand each.
Let's say, find out how much it's gonna cost to borrow money from
they can
the
hire
bank,
you.
and then we can make a final decision. We've got 2 more shots at this.
Okay, so what are we doing tonight? I want a final decision of what, are we doing anything with dredging line item tonight?
Are you wanting her to look into for 200 or?
No, because we have 100, we already have 32,
But we'll have 50, we'll
We
have
have 50.
50,000.
right? So how much would it cost us to borrow 150,000? And over how many years? And can we pay it off early? And then if we can pay it off early, then we can pay it off early.
That's something we.
And that way, at least we know what the options are.
I can ask, but they're not gonna lock us into anything
No.
until we're authorized to do that, so. I think that you're kind of just going around in circles. I think right now what you just need to decide is, okay, we're gonna borrow $150,000 from the bank, and then we're gonna pay the rest of it through the dredging. After talking to Marjorie with this, you're kind of, yes, you're penny pinching, but you need to make a decision.
What was her recommendation?
What I said is that you need to either decide you're gonna put it into capital or borrow.
Yeah.
And that's not, do the research, because if I can contact the bank, I can tell you that, yes, they're gonna, probably these are gonna be the rates, but they're not gonna lock us into anything unless we have that warrant article authorizing to go and borrow that money. And then July 1st, they'll lock us in the rate. So I think that, as helpful as this information is gonna be, it's not gonna provide you an answer. It's just delaying you in making that decision.
Yeah, so the bottom line is, do we
So
want to
again,
pay now or do we want to pay later?
are we going to put anything in dredging tonight? We're gonna put anything more in
I
dredging?
think we should put 100 grand in dredging, and then Vika can do, have a conversation with the bank and so forth.
Is yours still a recommendation of 70,000 more?
That's the equivalent of 68,000 more that we have currently suggested.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
suggesting that number should be for $100,000.
Okay.
Instead of 32,000.
You guys clear on that?
So then that would give us 118,000?
Yeah.
I'd rather keep it at 32 and then go to the bank for the 200 and whatever, and then use that to pay off of that the debt service for this year.
What about you, Dan? Do you have any clue what we're talking about? I do. You have a preference?
No, they both suck. No, sorry.
Because basically, I know it's not apples to apples with a bond loan and a loan from the Chi Savings Bank. Right now, we have a 6-year loan for a plow truck, which was about 135 or 40,000, and that payment is 6 years at $22,000 roughly. So if you bought 150,000, just making these numbers up, that's 5 years, it's over 30,000 a year.
Right, so you pay off the first year. Oh, no, we're paying that down, that's right. Yeah, I mean, to me, unless you want a big tax increase, I think 150. You know, if we find that Jackie comes in and says we are worth 25% more in our real estate, then, you know, the value of the town's gone up, that's a different story. But then over the next, 5 or 6 years, you pay, what is it, 30,000 a year, and then you pay it off.
Trouble is we're gonna end up with a whole bunch of little 30,000 a year here, 50,000 a year here, we need 10 million here.
Well, one of the
And
things,
all of a sudden, we're gonna bump up against something they call the debt limit, which, nobody in this group talks about.
I think it's 19 million.
The state says we can borrow up to that. Anybody that did so would be.
No, I know, I'm just saying, you have
To
to.
be honest, but I mean, just to put it down to, I was in that business for a long, long time.
Right,
I have a vague idea what I'm talking about. If we wanted to borrow more than about 10 or 11 million bucks, we would be stretching ourselves. Okay, so, and we talked about borrowing 100 grand here, 200 there, a million or so here, and we're gonna get there in a hurry. And all that's gonna add up to more debt service, and interest rates are not going down. So we have money that is earning us nothing. We should utilize that while maintaining a safe balance in that account to cover any cash flow issues and the things that we could traditionally use that money for. But we can take some off the top. This is a way to put it to work where we're gonna have to spend money and not have to pay higher interest rates than the rest of it.
no, I think that makes perfect sense, Jay, I would I would be in favor of doing that. I know a lot of you worry about the tax rate, and, that's not,
Well, I
my
think-
concern has been right along that we have been fudging it by putting money in and people don't realize that every year that what we spend goes up. And I think that what you're saying makes sense.
Well, and Eric, when people look around and they see that we've redone the roads, we got the dredging done, and if the taxes go up a little bit, you sort of say, oh, I get that. You can see where the money went. The issue is when not much gets done and the taxes go up. I mean, Yarmouth is talking about a 10% tax increase. I mean, Falmouth is not far behind. All up and down the coast, tax rates are going up. And, nobody has a problem understanding that things cost more. If we keep it reasonable and keep it close and get these other things done and taken care of, that's a definition in my mind of being successful.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that either. So your proposal, once again, just to be clear, on dredging, is to make that number 100,000 instead of 32, correct?
Right.
So we would have 100.
Unless you want to go home.
So we would be sitting, if it passes, we would be sitting on 118,000.
Right.
Disposal, and we would owe 205.
That'd be 82, 87,
Is that right? And so where does that
87.
money
You
come
still
from?
have to borrow.
So why don't we just?
Well, we delay payment until they finish the job.
Why don't we bring it up to either 200 or 190?
No, we
Pay for the whole thing.
take the whole 175?
Plus the 18, you'd have enough, we'd have 208.
So you're back to your earmark.
No, it's not.
No, it wouldn't be earmarked. Well,
Are you suggesting that you just
My-
send money into dredging right now?
My
and just pay it
suggestion-
off in one sum month and
Yeah.
deal with the potential tax increase and then not have it be going on for 6 years?
yeah. And then we use undesignated funds, and that would bring it down to essentially, it'd be about what we're putting it in right now.
So we might still have a dollar tax increase with the, once we add the extra revenue.
What do you think, Jen?
I think we should put in, makes the most sense to put in. I like the idea of putting in 100,000 and I know that you still have to pay some, but I have a hard time with them not finishing and not getting the job done. And we're just gonna assume that we have to automatically pay when they need it.
Well, it's gonna be up to the Army Corps, and that's the advantage. We're not dealing directly with the contractor.
I'm
So
really
hopefully,
interested in what Mark Gables has to say, and I'd like to have him down as soon as possible.
yeah, that's what I said.
So let's
Tomorrow, in fact, we can-
Let's come to a conclusion, folks.
I do put 100,000 in dredging right now, like Jay said.
Where you at, Jay?
I'm fucking down 175, but let's for tonight just do 100,000 there.
Okay, what about you two?
I'd say go, I move go, I'd say go to 75 and just do it.
No, we need 190 to do it.
Yeah,
Oh, 190, so we have 1,800.
Well, we got 18 in there.
Yeah, so to get to, so 175, oh, yeah, okay, so we need more than that, right?
I'm gonna go along with these guys, so we're gonna make the 32,000, 100,000, initial request over current budget. And, if it passes, we will have some of what we need, and then we will need to probably finance $90,000.
And we'll have to have a warrant article that says that.
Yeah.
But we may have more information from Jackie before that.
Just to sell it for tonight. That's all I'm
Yeah.
trying to do.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Anybody else have anything else on the budget? Thank you very much for everything. Sorry about the length of that discussion.
Yep, no, it's good. All right, so the next thing on the agenda is, we have a presentation from Jim, a few weeks ago. This is the same schedule he gave us. And so we said we would bring it back. And what is the pleasure of the board? Does someone want to make a motion to adopt this new fee schedule?
I move to adopt the new fees and fine schedule proposed by the code officer.
Is there a second?
I can explain why I'm not seconding. Would you like to hear that?
Sure.
The only reason I'm not seconding this motion is specific one, on page 1, renovation and alteration, which is right under note, including floor level. Is currently $10 per $1,000 of estimate, and he wants to up it to 11. And Falmouth is at $5 or $6. Yarmouth is at $6. Cumberland is at, I don't know, maybe 10 or $12. I think this is too high, and it's been out of proportion. You've been able to build a new residence for half of what it costs to remodel in this town for years, and
So what's your recommendation?
keep it at 10.
Keep it at 10, okay.
I'm not doing it because I
Are you
make
okay with
money.
that?
I'm fine with that.
I want to be clear on something. I'm not doing it because I make less or more money. I don't make any money on permit. I've heard from homeowners in the past, and not so much in the present, but in the past, that they, I mean, if you estimate something at $300,000, it's a $3,000 permit. You can build a new house for about $1,800. That'll matter. That's all I'm saying.
What's the rationale for that, I wonder?
I don't know. We just carried it over from someone.
Oh, so we've had it for a long time, hasn't been changed.
Not being nitpicky, I just wanted to let you know. That's
Would
why.
you second it with that change? Who was happy with it?
I would second it if that's kept at $10.
Okay.
Can you repeat, I need the motion repeated then, wait, if you want.
So to approve, the fees and fines written, as written by the code officer with the amendment of renovation and alteration be kept at $10 per 1,000.
Thank you.
I don't anything about commercial, I'm sorry.
Then Mark, you gonna second that?
Yeah, I'll second it to get this thing moving, sorry.
Okay, anybody, all right, so now we can talk about it. Jay and Jen, what do you got for?
The only one I questioned, because it personally affected me, I'm just putting up a wall upstairs in the hood, and it costs, $100 to put up a wall, it's a small wall. Like, with this, it would be $300, and that just seems like a lot. That's just what it is, but I don't have a recommendation because I don't know what other towns are doing.
Should I speak now?
Sure.
And I don't know commercial construction. I've never worked in commercial, and I did not have a chance to ask Jim specifically about that one. I know he inspects commercial for the town of Old Orchard and before that, the town of Scarborough, but I did not have a chance to ask his rationale on that.
When I read this, I would think new construction is if you're building a new construction, a new building. Like, say you're building a new store or a restaurant or something, that would be what that would go with. It doesn't seem like it doesn't say about renovation. Because wouldn't that be under renovation?
Yeah, that's the 5 cents per square foot. Oh, no, that's electrical.
Yeah, I would have thought that would be a renovation or an alteration, not a commercial building permit.
I think what he's doing there is he's increasing the minimum fee for a commercial application or, permit application from 100 to 300. I don't know if what you're describing would be meaning pay $300. I really have no idea.
Because it doesn't say renovation and alteration.
Well, I don't want to bog this down anymore.
Can I just make a comment for the sake of moving this along? I had a long talk with him about this. He obviously has worked in a number of different places. I trust that after speaking with him, he had looked into other towns, including the ones that he had worked with, including some of the towns that are smaller. I support his recommendation. You have the authority to make this change at any point. And so I think for the sake of moving along, because it is so easy for you to come back and make this change in the future if you choose you don't want to. But in the meantime, if you propose this and this goes into effect, that's revenue that the town is going to be collecting. Vote on it, and then, if you want additional changes in the future, then have that conversation come up in the future.
What? Oh, I'm sorry, Bob.
I'm coming from a different place. You guys have had so many questions that indicate that you're really not sure where some of these things are coming from and what they mean. I would propose that you go back to the drawing board and start with a chart that says, here's what the big charge is now for each item. Here's what these other 5 towns charge for each item. And then the last column is here's what should move to.
And I think he just left out the part in between. We have what we charge now, and we have what he thought we should charge. And he
But
looked at,
there's no background. There's no detail showing where he looked at other counties. If we're just relying on his expertise, I would recommend you really need to do the homework before you make this major decision. And that homework, if it's been done, we haven't seen the homework. You guys have all been asking questions and saying things like, well, I'm not sure what this means, or whether this applies to this wall project. It just doesn't sound like it's baked well enough to implement. I think you really need to look at a detailed spreadsheet that says, this is what you're being charged now, line by line. This is what these other 5 towns charge, line by line, and this is what we're proposing going to. Then you can make an informed decision.
well, I think that most of this, people don't have any questions about, right? Rika?
To comment with that, I think that with all due respect, I have to disagree in that sense. He is our hired code enforcement officer. He is hired because he has the qualifications and knowledge. He is coming to you with a recommendation. You could choose to accept that recommendation or not accept it. If you don't want to accept it right now, then, you can bring back with additional suggestions from him. But right now, I think just, this is the second time it's coming in front of you where you aren't gonna know every detail of what everything is here. He was here last time. I just, I think a decision should be made one way or another.
Yeah, I agree with Rika. I think that what we should do is vote on this, and if it passes and you find that you want to change something, you can do it next month. You could do it whatever, but this is building season, and it just seems like moving it forward. We've got a motion, we've got a second, is there any more conversation? All right, all in favor of the motion? All opposed? Okay, 3-2. Move forward. And knowing that you can come back, and if people have questions, they should reach out to Jim and figure, and get that information. Okay, the next thing was, another item that he brought up was the growth management ordinance. And the issue here is on page 4. And what it would do is to take out the actual amount of what a growth permit application would be, and to change the language to be determined by the Board of Selectmen. And so this would have to go to town meeting because this is an ordinance. Anybody, Mark?
What would give us the ability to determine the fee?
The same thing as, it would just go on this, it would go on this fee structure thing. And so it would be determined in just the way we determine everything else, instead of having it in an ordinance, so that the only way to change it is go to town meeting.
Oh, just to take it out of the ordinance,
Right.
have the ability, that's all we're doing?
Yeah, so what I would suggest is a motion, that the growth permit, 107 2.3 is, the growth permit application shall be determined by the Board of Selectmen, refundable, and just everything else the way it says, except taking up $100.
So if this passes tonight, it will go to town meeting on a warrant.
Right.
I move that we, authorize the town administrator to draft a warrant article to take the existing fee out of the growth management for the people to consider it.
Okay, anybody have any discussion about that one? All right, seeing none, anybody in the audience? No. Okay, all in favor? All right, unanimous. Now quickly moving on. I have a letter from Sheila Jordan, and it's about this next item, but it was actually, she didn't even know I was doing the item, but that was on the agenda. But she wanted me to read this because she just doesn't want to go out at night. To live on an island and not have access to the shore, specifically the beaches, is a shame. I mean this in the full sense of the word, a sadness and frustration toward the individual and a lack of attention and compassion on the part of the town. I speak strongly because we, Phil and I, spoke before a year ago since then, and the situation has only grown worse. The primary beaches, Chandler's, Hamilton, and Rose's Point, which we perhaps others have continuously, customarily used, are inaccessible or partially so to the handicapped, even the unsteady. At Chandler's, or one of the two entrances is flooded and the descent from the other lacks support and repair, ending in a broken boardwalk. At Hamilton, part of the former, near past the former Minedale property, a yard or so of rocky rubble blocks safe access for some. And at Rose's Point, through the access from the boatyard is open. The exit at the other end of the beach is difficult and hazardous because of an eroded bank. Another is for steps without support. In their last 2 or 3 instances, a simple solid post to give the grip would help a lot. None of this appears to be complicated and time consuming or an expensive fix. We truly hope it can be done for the good of others and for ourselves and for our town. A further thought for the truly handicapped might be benches or a picnic table placed above the access points so that those who cannot manage the beaches can sit and look out at the scene and the water. Yours truly, Sheila and Phil Jordan. And I think she's talking about down at Chandler's having some kind of a bench so they could sit there and look at the water even if they couldn't get to it. So that was, as I said, not necessarily connected to this proposal, but based on discussions that we've had in the last 15 years since we've been in town, I just drafted an idea for a coastal access committee that could compile all the information we have about all the different access points. And it's pretty straightforward in here of the tasks and what would happen. And so I'm just bringing it forward to you for in your deliberation. All right.
I'll make a motion that we form an ad hoc coastal access committee as proposed.
Second.
Okay, so moved and seconded. Any discussion? Jay?
When I read this, I thought, a lot of this sounds familiar. So I got out the Coastal Waters Commission documents. Basically, while the language is a little different, it's all covered within the Coastal Waters Commission. So if we specifically wanted to ask them to do a project like identify each specific town property and what those specific access points were, or what they needed, that would well fall within their purview. So creating a second committee that's basically doing what the long existing committee already responsible for, I didn't understand that.
Well, we've been in town for 15 years and it hasn't happened yet.
That's not, then the point is then we need to go back to Coastal Waters and say, we need you to do the following, please.
Well, they have many different things that they take into consideration, and building steps and those kinds of things. There's never been anything that they have come to the board, and at least when I've been on the board, and discussed. So I guess I don't see the harm in this if we can get some people who are interested to just put it together. Jen?
My only concern is how difficult it is to get people on these committees, and maybe if it was asked of the coastal waters, if it is part of their, their toolbox, that maybe it would have people that would be interested in this kind of committee join coastal waters committee.
I guess my thought is you're going to get different kinds of, you might get different people who would be interested in just this specific thing and not interested in some of the other activities like aquaculture and all that kind of stuff that the coastal waters needs to do.
I just think it's a way of making that committee a broader scope.
Anyone else? Janelle?
I think you should put it in front of the coastal waters first. And if they say they don't want to tackle it, then pick the committee after that.
Thank you. Bob?
I would agree that if the select board has not recently made the specific request on this topic, it would actually, I think, be disempowering to coastal waters to not do that first. It's hard to be on one of these committees and have people take stuff that's in your charter and say, well, we're gonna have somebody else do that. If coastal waters then replied to your official request and said, we don't have time for that, then you might want to look at other alternatives. But without having formally asked coastal waters first, I think you're doing a disservice to the committee structure that the town has.
So I'm glad to hear that coastal waters is up and running and more active, because last I heard, we didn't even have a full complement. So, that,
It is up and running, yes. We had a meeting last month. We're gonna have one hopefully next week.
I just know how some of these big committees, like something like this, I just don't want to see it die. And
I don't think it would die. I would think that they would say, I'm not part of the committee, I just go to the meetings. I think that they would address it. They would say, this is something that, because this is something that we don't want to deal with. And then you guys could put a committee together. If
An
that's what they
appropriate, sorry. An appropriate way for coastal waters to handle it would be to form a subcommittee tasked with this specific item. That was a couple members of coastal waters who had interest, with some members of the community that had interest, so that the people who were doing the work weren't being taken away from other coastal water business, and sort of allowed some new blood to come in and help out. That's one way to do it in a way that still empowers the committee that has that in their charter.
Okay, anybody else?
I think it makes sense. I think we should table this till we hear back from coastal water. Approach coastal waters and see if there's something they're interested in.
Okay, well then, we can send a memo to them and ask them if they want to take this on, or we'll go forward and try to do it.
I do have a question before we exit this.
Yeah,
Coastal Waters not meeting tomorrow night?
No,
Why is that?
because it wasn't posted in time. It needs to be posted in a week.
My point of my question is, on their meeting structure on the town website, it says they will meet every fourth Thursday, and they don't seem to be consistent, so I would urge.
We did have our first meeting on that last month.
I would urge more consistency out of that committee if I were you, because it's just a suggestion.
and I guess I would, I just still want to say that I think this is a specific project. I think there are people in the community who would be interested in doing it. And it's no offense to coastal waters, but I just, from my experience in the last 15 years, I have not seen that coastal waters has, it's too broad a charge.
I think we just send it to them and let them know, our request. And
But if
the
they're
meeting
not
probably on the third, this month, the third. So by beginning of June, we should know if they're interested, and if they're not, then we'll put this back up.
Okay,
But there is a motion
we have a motion.
on the table.
All right, so you want to withdraw your motion?
I'll withdraw my motion for that.
Okay, so communications. Anybody have a communication? Items to be put on future agendas.
Let's go back to communications one second, if you might. I got a nice note back from Melissa Fritsch, thanking us for our interest and, saying that perhaps we can take this up later.
Yeah, I thought that was a very nice note, Jay.
Was it
Thanks for
regarding
passing
the-
that on.
Awesome.
That was on the WWA
Oh,
BP,
I'll forward it.
if I got that all in the right.
Too bad we didn't have a fish anymore. Really?
Well, that's what they're looking for.
Right.
Anybody else have, anything under communication? Okay, future items for the agenda. What do you have, Lisa?
Proposed transfer station fee changes.
And will there also be a ordinance change?
I hope so.
You put this on that, maybe just out of curiosity,
Which one?
the transfer station.
So Donna and Bo and I, and then we had, Ann and, Gail. And we've met 5, 6 times, gone through the ordinance and the fees, looked at other towns and figured out that we're not charging enough compared to other towns for things.
It was interesting. We're nowhere close to one where Long Island was in 2018.
That'll make us popular.
No, but I mean, seriously, I mean, we were shocked.
Well, there's also some other stuff we're talking about to try to alleviate and get some costs back into it.
Don't worry, I'll support it, I'm just reasonable.
What else? We got, I think that
$11.
broadband contract will be next week.
If,
Hopefully,
yeah,
if we get,
if we can get it in, yeah.
I mean, if we don't get it, we're not gonna get it for a long time because she's going to Arizona, so. And there's a couple of other, can't remember off the top of my head, but things heading to town meeting that needs to happen too. Okay, so, there's nothing further. Anybody else, anything else about the agenda? No? Okay.
I have, excuse me, 2 things that, while we're on this subject, that I forgot to mention that I will mention that would have been under communications. The chipping is gonna begin soon, speaking of the dump.
Yeah.
They've started bringing their stuff out here, so they're gonna start chipping, that. I did have a conversation with, Public Works about their comfort level and trying to distribute a lot of these chips and really start advertising to get people to come get it, so we can eliminate a lot of the stuff before we get some more in there. If you're comfortable with it, I was comfortable with it, just kind of put out a text alert and maybe put it on Facebook, letting people know that, it's available. And Chuck said he's comfortable. He's had some people where if he's working there, they'll come up, he'll load the truck. If he's moving them around, that we can get people to kind of spread the word and, start advertising that it's available and try to get as much of that stuff out of there as we can.
How do people know when he's available? How do people know when he's available?
A lot of the time you'll see him there in the tractor moving things around, but he said that if people want to call Public Works and say, hey,
Telephone appointment.
if the dump is, if I can come up, and he said he's happy to do that to try to, versus trying to, sit here and coordinate what weekend would work, what day, what hours. He said that he would be very happy that if people call the Public Works, we can try to get some of that stuff out of there, so. That was one, and then the other thing is that floats, they fixed a few things, and when the weather permits, the rest of them will go in the water.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So the next thing on the agenda is motion to go into executive session.
I move to go into executive session pursuant 1 MRSA 4056A and 4056C.
Your second.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Okay.